This morning, I want to talk about your life, and this is going to be totally different than any other message. Actually, it's not at all. We pretty much talk about your life every Sunday. But what I want to do this morning is I want to come at this from kind of a big picture perspective, because someday your life and my life, as we all know, are going to come to an end, and I feel like the older I get, the faster it goes. There will come a day, and I don't get the privilege of knowing when that will be, when my days on this earth are done. And the question that I want to ask you today is simply this. When your life is over, will it have mattered that you lived? Now, I know you're like, okay, this is heavy. Yeah, like, I know. But this is important. And it is really good sometimes to stop and reflect on this. When your time here is done, will it really matter that you were ever here? And I want that question to sort of linger as we walk through the message today, because we're going to look at a very famous story that Jesus told, and it's about living a life that matters. It's about being empowered by God to do something great with our life. Now, in a lot of the parables, Jesus tells a story, and then we're kind of left trying to figure out what it all means. But this one is very cool because he tells the story and then talks about some other stuff, and then he comes back to the story and he explains to us what it all means. He actually lays it out for us. So let's first look at the story. This is Matthew chapter 13, and this is verses 1 to 9. And so it gives us a little setting, and then Jesus launches in. It says, "That same day, Jesus went out of the house and sat by the lake. Such large crowds gathered around him that he got in a boat and sat in it while all the people stood on the shore." Can you imagine that scene? People just packed out so much that he actually goes out on the boat, teaches from the boat. It says, he told them many things in parables, saying, "A farmer went out to sow his seed. As he was scattering the seed, some fell along the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Some fell on rocky places where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow, but when the sun came up, the plants were scorched, and they withered because they had no root. Other seed fell among thorns, which grew up and choked the plants. Still other seed fell on good soil, where it produced a crop, 100, 60, or 30 times what was sown." He says, "Whoever has ears, let them hear." And now if you hear the story and you're like, at this point you're like, I don't get it. Here's the cool thing. It's not a problem, because he's about to explain it. And so he lays out for all of us what these symbols are and what they mean. Okay, now this is verses 18 to 23. It says, "Listen to what the parable of the sower means. When anyone hears the message about the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what was sown in their heart. This is the seed that was sown along the path. The seed falling on rocky ground refers to someone who hears the word and at once receives it with joy, but since they have no root, they last only a short time. When trouble or persecution comes because of the word, they quickly fall away. The seed falling among the thorns refers to someone who hears the word, but the worries of this life and the deceitfulness of wealth choke the word, making it unfruitful. But the seed falling on good soil refers to someone who hears the word and understands it. This is the one who produces a crop yielding 100, 60, or 30 times what was sown." So Jesus says that if the seed, okay, if his words, if his teaching, if the gospel, if the seed lands on good soil, okay, in other words, a heart that's receptive, if the truth of Jesus finds a heart that's truly receptive, it's going to produce this incredible crop, this huge harvest. In other words, a life that will do amazing things, a life that will have a great impact on the world. But if something in our heart is off, if the soil is bad, the seed is never going to grow into anything substantial. There just won't be any fruit. Now, the words of Jesus, they just won't be cultivated, and they won't come to life. They'll just sort of die, or they'll just fade, or they'll just sort of be choked out in the life of that person. And so this morning, what I want us to do is just kind of quickly take a few minutes and evaluate our hearts and think about where we are. Jesus says there are several things that can make soil bad. Several different heart issues that people can have. Several different things that prevent a life from being all that God wants it to be, all that Jesus is trying to make it into. Several reasons that a life would have very little or no impact. And so I want to walk through these with you this morning. And the first one, he says, the first heart problem is simply, he says, a hard heart. Okay, verse 19, it says, when anyone hears the message about the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what was sown in their heart. This is the seed that was sown along the path. So Jesus says, seed that falls on a hard path, obviously, it's just not going to grow. It's like trying to plant something, on your driveway or on the road. The seed just can't penetrate. It needs soft soil to be able to burrow into. The little seeds need to nestle into that soil. And so if it just sits on top of that hard surface, eventually the wind comes, or Jesus says the birds come, and it's just taken away. Seed that lands on a rocky path, it never has a chance. And for a variety of reasons, our hearts, as you all know, can be or become hard toward God. Now, for me, and I know many of you know my story, but I lived the first 20 years of my life with a heart of like concrete. And it was hard for two reasons. The first is that Christianity seemed utterly ridiculous to me. I mean, I thought of Jesus, I was like, okay, there's Jesus and there's like Santa. And I thought, man, okay, our parents all told us all that junk about Santa. He has the elves and they make all the toys, which are awesome. And then he rides a sleigh and there's Rudolph and all that. And it brought this feeling of magic to Christmas, right? The parents would tell that story with a gleam in their eye. And I'm like, oh, this is wonderful. This is magical. This is fantastic. And then Santa's making a list and he's checking it twice. He's going to find out who's naughty and nice. And so now we have a way to get kids to behave. And I thought, but at some point, of course, we find out that this is all pretend, that it's all made up, and it crushes us. And if you're just finding that out right now, I apologize. But part of growing up, okay, part of being an adult, part of being in touch with reality is knowing this kind of stuff. And eventually we all find out, I don't care if you're 3 or 13, we find out that Santa's not real. Now, so I'm looking at this and I'm going, I don't know who made up all of this stuff about Jesus, but honestly, how in the world can thinking rational adults believe this? It just seemed utterly ridiculous to me. It seemed about as credible as Santa. So I had all these intellectual objections. But there was something else. I also objected for another reason. Now, this was not forefront in my mind. I kind of just used the Santa argument all the time. But there was something else. I objected for another reason. And it was simply that, okay, I wanted to do what I wanted to do. I didn't want to be accountable to anyone. I didn't want to be accountable to anything. I didn't want anybody telling me how to live. I didn't want anybody telling me what to do. I was partying it up, and I liked it, and I didn't want to stop. Now, I think that most people at that point in my life, I hope they would have said that I, for the most part, I was a pretty nice guy. Like I wasn't eager to be mean to people. I opened doors for old ladies and all that stuff. I wasn't a total jerk. There was some kindness in me, but I really wasn't open to God at all. And then in my senior year of high school, God started sending people, just waves of people. Suddenly, I had Christians in my life all over. I couldn't get away from them. And they were talking to me about Jesus and about God and about the Bible and about spiritual stuff all the time. In fact, I moved 3 times in a 3-year period. And everywhere I went, there's just Christians, talking to me about Jesus. And it was like, for them, it was like they were trying to plant this amazing crop, right in the middle of I-5. I mean, this seed had no chance, just none. My heart was so hard. None of it really penetrated at all. And it would just kind of get blown away or trampled or whatever. And this went on for 3 years. And for those 3 years, there was always just some Christian that was significant to me in my life. And that's just sort of how it was. And one night, this Christian guy from work asked me and my friends to read the Bible with him. And for some really weird reason, we all agreed. And I don't even remember exactly what we were reading, but it was something about Jesus in one of the Gospels. And something happened to me that night that I can't explain. That night I got this strange feeling, just this strange feeling that God might actually be real. And we were reading about Jesus and what he said and what he did, and I got this like strange warm feeling. And not only did I sense that God is real, which I certainly didn't believe prior to that. I mean, I truly was an atheist. But I also sensed somehow in all of this that like God liked me, that he loved me, that this God that might be real actually wanted really good things for me. Now, I didn't become a Christian that night, but God started something. It's like this little seed was planted. And over the next several months, my heart just continued to soften toward God. And I asked the guy that was leading that group of us if he would do the same thing the next week. And he said, sure. So we came together and he did it again. And then we said, hey, let's do that again next week. And he was like, okay. And we did it again, and we did it again and again and again for months. We did it for weekly. And I went to that thing. I was like, man, I'm going to be there for this, like the highlight of my week. And then I was like, you know what? I think I should find a church. There's a lot of people that do this. I should go see what this is all about. And so I found a church and I started going to that regularly. And eventually, several months down the road, I eventually decided to give my life to Jesus. And here's the really good news about God. He'll never force us to love him. He isn't interested in just forcing his way into anybody's life. He longs and he waits to be invited. But here's the thing, if we give him even the smallest opening, it's like he pounces on that. When it comes to the seed, all it takes is just this one tiny little opening. You just give that seed a little crack, and if it finds somewhere this soft, fertile soil, it starts to grow. And like, you know what I'm talking about? Like where you walk along a sidewalk, right? And the concrete has split and there's a crack in it, and you look in there, and because there's soil underneath that, and because there's softness underneath that, the seeds get down in there, and stuff starts growing out of those cracks. And that's how it is with God. He's just looking for an opening. He's looking for a crack. And that opening can really just start with a simple prayer or a simple kind of heart turning toward God, where we start to feel like this, or even say this: God, God, I have been closed off to you. My heart's been hard. I've been resisting you. But there is something in me. There is a place in me that wants to be open. There is a part of me that wants to trust you. I don't know that I want to trust you, but I want to trust you. I want to walk with you, I think. So God, soften my heart and help me to hear your word. Help me to understand what all of this is. Help me to see your face and begin to experience you. And that is the kind of heart, that's the kind of prayer, that is the kind of, God is longing for that. And God responds to that kind of prayer in a powerful way. And all it really takes is the slightest opening, even the smallest area of soft soil. And once the seed hits that, it can start to grow. Now, I know some of you, you guys are all over the map with where you are with God in this room. I mean, it's just all over the map. Some of you, you're not even sure how you ended up here this morning. It's like, what's happening? Others of you, you've been in a place where you've had a soft heart. But if you look at your life recently, it's just gotten harder and harder and harder. What do? Well, you reach out to God and you say, God, if I don't want you, I want to want you. And you ask him to move, and you open yourself up. It's amazing what God can do with the slightest movement toward him. Okay, Jesus says there's another heart problem. He says it's shallow faith. Now, here's what he says. This is verses 20 and 21. He says, the seed falling on rocky ground refers to someone who hears the word and at once receives it with joy, but since they have no root, they last only a short time. When trouble or persecution comes because of the word, because of their faith, they quickly fall away. Now, a lot of the land in Palestine, and Jesus is in this boat and he's looking out at these people, and they understand agriculture, they understand seed, they understand crops. Their livelihoods depend on this. And in so many places of that country, there's just this shallow, like 1 inch of topsoil, and then below that's just rock. And so roots try to get established in that, and they start to grow a little bit, but then they hit that rock and there's just nowhere to go. They have no chance to spread or to flourish. And Jesus said that some people initially they hear the message of Christ, or they hear they hear the gospel, and they respond really well at first. They're excited. But then they face something hard, where their faith is tested, where they have to give something up, where life doesn't go the way that they thought it would. Something that tests their faith, and they discover that actually their roots don't go very deep. I think a lot of people that initially follow Jesus, they follow thinking that, okay, if I follow Jesus, this is going to make my life easier. This is going to make my life more enjoyable. And they hear about things like the peace that comes in following Jesus. And maybe they say something like, yeah, well, I feel stressed out a lot. Like, I could use more peace. So if that's following, I'll follow Jesus. And there's this unspoken assumption that in following Jesus, somehow life will kind of magically get easier and more comfortable. And guys, I just want to say that's just, it's not true. That's not the point. Following Jesus isn't about an easier, more comfortable life. I mean, I want to ask you a serious question. And for those of you that have been around Brookview before, I've asked this before, but this is a really important question. Like, when in the Bible, and think through the whole Bible, all of it that you know, when in the Bible does God give somebody a job and it turns out to be low risk and effort free? I mean, think about just the famous people. I mean, God comes to Noah. God comes to Noah and he says, I want you to build an ark, this massive boat in the face of mocking and ridicule, and I want you to restart the human race on earth. God comes to Abraham and he says, I want you to leave everything that's familiar to you and I want you to go to a far country. I'm not even going to tell you where it is. Just pack up all your stuff and go, and I'll tell you when to stop. God comes to Moses and he says, I want you to leave a life that's very comfortable, that's familiar to you, this life of shepherding, and I want you to go back to Egypt where you're wanted for murder, and I want you to make demands of the Pharaoh, the most powerful and most feared man in the world. And God sends a messenger, to Esther and says, I want you to risk your position. She's the queen of Persia. I want you to risk your position and your very life to make a request of the king. I want you to go to the king, even though he hasn't called you or invited you, even though going to the king without invitation carries the penalty of death. And I want you to ask him to change an edict that he's made to kill all of the Jews in his entire kingdom. See, when God calls people, he's kind of in the habit of not calling them to a life of greater comfort and greater security. In fact, there's a whole chapter in the Bible, Hebrews chapter 11, that summarizes the life of one hero of faith after another. And it's about people who God has called, and he's called them to do something very hard. I just want to read a portion of this to you. It goes on and on and on, but I just want to read a portion of this to you. I'm picking this up in verse 32. And the writer of Hebrews says, and what more shall I say? I do not have time to, and he's told about all these different heroes in detail. He says, I do not have time to tell about Gideon, Barak, Samson, and Jephthah, about David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, and gained what was promised, who shut the mouths of lions, quenched the fury of the flames, and escaped the edge of the sword, whose weakness was turned to strength, and who became powerful in battle and routed foreign armies. Women received back their dead, raised to life again. There were others who were tortured, refusing to be released so that they might gain even a better resurrection. Some faced jeers and flogging and even chains and imprisonment. They were put to death by stoning. They were sawed in two. They were killed by the sword. They went about in sheepskins and goatskins, destitute, persecuted, and mistreated. The world was not worthy of them. They wandered in deserts and mountains, living in caves and holes in the ground. These are the people that God has called. And if they were looking for comfort and security, they didn't get it. And so you read words like this, and then you got to ask yourself, how high of a value does Jesus place on making sure that people who follow him lead really comfortable lives? Now, Jesus loves you intensely. He wants really good stuff for you. He wants you to grow. He wants you to be strong. He wants you to be filled with courage. And he wants you to leave a deep imprint on this earth with your life. But it's really important that we understand Jesus' primary concern is not that our lives be incredibly comfortable. Now, sometimes people don't understand this. They just don't understand this. And when life goes a different direction than what they were intending, they feel let down by God. And they will think to themselves, they'll even vocalize something like this. I followed God. Okay, I did this. I followed God. I said yes to God, but he didn't make my life more comfortable. He didn't give me all the things that I wanted to feel safe and secure and well off. In fact, since I started following God, my life has gotten way harder and way more complicated. And they start to feel kind of betrayed by God. And they give up on him. And the problem is that God never promised that stuff. God consistently calls people out of the comfortable into the uncomfortable. And it seems to me that's really where we come to life. It's when we're doing what we know is right, and it's really hard. And so we have to rely on God for strength. We have to pray like crazy that he would act, that he would open doors, that he would go before us, that he would enable some problem to be fixed. And we're depending on God and on him acting. And guys, that is where we experience life. And so I just want to ask you this morning, thinking about your own life, if you're a Christ follower, when's the last time that you got involved in something so good and yet so difficult that you had no choice but to just plead with God to move? No choice but to just plead with God to act. When's the last time you engaged in something so hard and yet so right, you were completely dependent on God to carry you through it? Because that's where we experience his presence and his power. That's where we see him move mountains. That's where our lives intersect with his power. And he uses that then to do in us what we could never do. And that's when we produce fruit. It's when we push through the hard stuff, when we have no choice but to depend on God. That's when our life becomes this amazing harvest. We want the harvest, but we want comfort and security. God says it doesn't work that way. And I just want to say, if you're in your life right now and you're in a tough spot, you're in a spot that you never intended to be, and you sense Jesus is calling you to do something hard, I'm just telling you, you got to push through that. You don't give up. You push through it because God will meet you there. But you can't give up. And Jesus says there's a third heart problem. That's what maybe we would call a cluttered heart. It's a heart that's filled with so many things that really there's just no room for God. Here's what Jesus says in verse 22. He said, the seed falling among the thorns refers to someone who hears the word, but the worries of this life and the deceitfulness of wealth choke the word, making it unfruitful. Now, this is the soil that's soft enough and it's deep enough. The problem is there's clutter. Problem is there's thorns and there's weeds popping up everywhere. Problem is the weeds, okay, if this is a yard, the weeds are just taking over. Now, if you're in this condition, you're able to say, okay, my heart's not hard toward God. I'm not intentionally defiant or rebellious or deliberately closed off. It's not like my faith is superficial. I really do believe I need Jesus. I believe that. I don't have this shallow, superficial faith. I know hard things are going to come. But it's just that there's a lot of clutter. It's just that I have, really, I just have a lot of stuff going on right now. I'm just super busy and I have a lot to think about. And so, I've been a little distracted lately. Just a lot of clutter in my life. And you look at that and you go, oh, well, that's kind of cute. I mean, it's just such a small, little innocent thing. And that's what makes it so dangerous. Because we don't see that as a big deal. We don't. We live in America, man. We're busy. How you doing, man? I'm busy. You're busy? Yeah, I'm so busy. You won't believe how busy I am. Busy and busy. Crazy busy. It's crazy. My life is crazy. How's your life? It's crazy. Busy. Whew. And we do that, and people wear that as a badge of respect. I'm so important. I've got so many things going on. Look at my life. It's just filled with all these amazing things. Busy, crazy. And so we just keep doing it. And we think, someday I'll get out of this season. Someday this will change. The problem is, if we don't see that as a problem, if we don't tackle it, it never does. We actually have to address this issue. And I'm not saying that there aren't times that we're busy. I'm saying there's a busyness where we're focused on the things of God and God is involved in directing everything we're doing, and there's a busyness where we have left God out of the picture. I'm talking about the one where God is out of the picture. Those are the weeds that Jesus was busy at times. And here's the thing about weeds, these things that just pop up in our life and they just keep us from God. You ever notice with weeds that they rarely go away on their own? It's not very often that weeds say, I've been in this yard long enough. And they say, hey guys, let's go over to somebody else's yard. Let's just take a little weed journey down the block and plant ourselves somewhere else. Guys, weeds don't do that. When they get someplace, they tend to stick around. In fact, some of you have yards, you've noticed this, they spread. They invite all their weed buddies to come over and they have some weed intimacy and pretty soon there's little weeds everywhere. Weeds don't just go away by themselves. We have to tackle weeds. We have to do something about weeds. And you know where we have to start when it comes to this crazy busy life where we can't figure out what our priorities are? We got to start with our values. Because the weeds are usually born right out of our values. We get consumed with what Jesus calls the worries of this life. Our life becomes all about personal success. It's all about climbing the ladder, or it's all about making money or getting promotions or bigger houses or nicer cars or cooler clothes or, loftier titles. It comes about more extravagant vacations, finer wines, better foods, nicer hotels. And as life becomes more and more and more about pleasure or comfort or success, it becomes less and less and less about Jesus. It's not that I've abandoned him. It's just that my priorities aren't his priorities. And life with him is just taking a back seat to everything else. And one of the things that drives all of this is this pressure that we constantly feel. And I think we all feel this. We do. We have this pressure where we feel like I've got to measure up. Okay, I've got to stack up. Somehow I've got to make it. And so the job and the car and the house and the vacation and the titles and all of that, it isn't just that we enjoy that stuff. It's that we think that it validates us. And one of the things that we learn as early on in childhood as we possibly can, when we just start to look at the world and comprehend what's going on, is that there are important people and there are unimportant people, right? There are beautiful people and there are ugly people. There are valuable people and there are not so valuable people. There are cool people and there are uncool people. And of course, it becomes very important, okay, that we be cool. That we be important, that we be valuable, that we be beautiful. And this goes on everywhere we go. You think of schools are always, every school, I don't care what you do to it. If you make the kids wear uniforms, you give them all the same haircut, I don't care what you do. There will always be cool kids and there will always be geeks. There will always be kids somewhere in the middle trying to climb and get to that cool group. And just about everywhere we go in our lives, there's a ranking system. It's true at work. There's cool people, valuable people at work, and then not so much. It's true in the neighborhood. It's true at the gym. It's true when you're hanging out with a larger group of friends on Friday night. It's true pretty much everywhere we go. Now, where this system comes from, God only knows. But the system itself is rarely questioned. And even though we all pretty much agree that it's completely evil, it remains in play, dictating to us how we feel about ourselves all the time. Donald Miller gives a little word picture of this system, and I shared this years ago, but I really like this word picture. It resonates with me. But he writes this. He says, when I was a kid in elementary school, my teacher, Mrs. Wunsch, that's so awesome, Mrs. Wunsch asked our class a question that I've come back to about 1 million times trying to figure out an answer. The question that she asked went along with a lesson about values clarification. which is a fancy name for learning how to be a snob. And this is how the question went. If there were a lifeboat adrift at sea, and in the lifeboat were a male lawyer, a female doctor, a crippled child, a stay-at-home mom, and a garbage man, and one person had to be thrown over to save the others, which person would we choose? That's interesting that you say that. He says, I don't remember which person it was that we threw out of the boat. I think it came down to the lawyer. But I can't remember exactly. I do remember, however, that the class did not hesitate in deciding who had value and who didn't. The idea that all people are equal never came up. We knew this sort of thing intrinsically, or at least we thought we did. Now, in our world, we rank people. It's what we do. We do this naturally. And that means that for many of us, most of our life really is, in one way or another, just presenting our case for why we ought to be allowed in the boat. Most of what we do, and you think about this, most of what we do, most of our energy is spent trying to get in the boat. And it deeply affects what our lives are really all about. And so I just want to pause here and ask you to think about your life these days. Like, what is your life mostly about? And maybe there's a lot of weeds creeping in. And maybe Jesus, what he wants most for you is kind of getting choked out. Where are the weeds coming from, and why are they there? What in the world is happening? Who are you trying to prove something to? What is it that you're tempted to allow to just take over your life and sort of squeeze Jesus out? And my guess is this, for many of you, it has something to do with proving yourself to somebody. You want somebody to think you're valuable. You want somebody to think you're cool. You want somebody to think you have what it takes. It could be the other mommies. Oh man, I got to prove myself with my kids and the way I'm raising them. It could be your career. Man, I got to prove that I can climb the ladder. I got to prove to somebody. It could be you're in school and I got to prove to these guys that I'm cool, and I'll do whatever it takes. I'll do whatever it is they value. I'll do more of that. And you look at our compulsion to have more, better car, better house. What is that about? Is it really that I enjoy driving a better car that much? Maybe it is. But maybe it's really about proving ourselves. And you look at the pressure that we're under, the pressure that we all feel, because we're not allowing God to tell us who we are. We're looking around at the broader culture and we're saying to those people, I need you to tell me who I am. And then they put their values on us, and now we got to live a frantic life so that we can live up to their values, and they can tell us that we belong in the boat. And the whole time Jesus is going, oh man, you don't need that. I love you, and I have a plan for your life, and I want to do something extraordinary through you. And if you would let go of all the pressure and all the desire to measure up and suck up and impress all of these people, you would not believe what I could do in your life. And I just want us to stop and think, like, if God says, I want to do something extraordinary in your life, if you'll give me your heart, what's in the way of you giving him your heart? Is it that you have a hard heart? Is it that it's shallow? You only want God in your life if he's going to give you the thing you most want right now? Is it that there's all this other stuff competing and you just can't figure out how to work that all in with God? What is it? And it's important to figure it out, because what Jesus is saying here is God wants to use your life to do something to impact this world that nobody else can do. You know, God has given you a personality, and he's given you a people that you know. He's given you resources and abilities. Nobody else has those. And he's called you to impact people in a way that nobody else can. But if your life becomes all about something else, that all gets cast aside. Verse 23, Jesus says, but the seed falling on good soil. What happens when a heart is actually given over to God? When the seed falls on good soil, refers to someone who hears the word and understands it. And this is the one who produces a crop yielding 100, 60, or 30 times what was sown. And this is Jesus saying, give God your heart. Like, if you're not giving God your heart, why not? And maybe you're in a spot here this morning where you're just like, I don't know about this whole thing. And Jesus is saying, well, give me a little opening. Give me a little crack, and I'll start pouring some seed in there, and you watch what happens with that. This morning, we're gonna take communion together. And I just want to say, if you're in a spot where you know your heart has not been seeking God or open to God or aligned with him, he loves you. And a lot of times you come to a communion table and people are just, feeling so much guilt. It's not about that. God is saying, I have beautiful things for you if you will open yourself to me. And so I just want to encourage you, as you go to the table this morning, think about your heart. Think about what it is that's preventing you from giving it to him, because the moment that you open yourself up, there's just nothing but celebration in heaven. So the story of the prodigal son is all about God going, yes, I see you turning. I love what Casey's sermon from a couple weeks ago. I see you turning, and I'm going to run to you. I'm going to meet you there. God will run to you, and he'll meet you there. But you got to open yourself. As you think about the bread and the body of Christ broken for you and the blood that was shed for you, it's all about God's grace and his love. And it's all about the extraordinary things he wants to do in you.